AK, Lilly, Devin, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with the three of you today. For people who aren't familiar with you, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the amazing work you're doing in the sports performance space, in particular around softball?
Cool. The one that's not in softball currently. That's me. Ashley Kowalewski. So I'm at university. Well, not university. I'm at the Louisiana State University. There you go. I'm gonna redo that. But I have been in softball historically for most of my career. Started out helping out with Michigan softball during my time there as a fellow, and eventually transitioned over into a full time position right before COVID. So none of that really works out very well, does it? Took over softball at Arizona for a while. Was kind of in a weird spot at Mizzou, but was still involved with softball. And then here at LSU, I actually started with baseball and historically have like tried to migrate over to softball, but it tends to be a little bit more, we'll call it siloed, not in a bad way, but like we're very separate, right? We have a lot of different separate weight rooms on this campus. So historically, softball, not so much anymore. Although one of these days, I think that's what I would. No, it's not what I think. I would like to get back into softball. Softball, baseball is just kind of a niche thing that I really enjoy. Um, like I'm sure we'll talk about in the rest of this podcast. It's just very different than the rest of sport, in my opinion, in a way that I really appreciate.
Awesome. Devin Young. I'm currently at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm going on my fourth off season here with softball. Not so much interesting, but my first year here, after that, we had a coaching change. So now, like, my last 2 years have been kind of diving into new coaching staff, what's important to them, like the girls they were recruiting, bringing in. Prior to that, I was at a Division III school. That was actually, I guess, my first exposure to softball, and that between here at Pitt is just night and day different, where they came in, we lifted, they left, and then the next group was in, and it's just every hour on the hour, just groups coming in. So over my going on 4 years here, really have tried to dive in with softball heavily, using like a lot of like speed with them. So we use a lot of like technology with like our 1080s, really trying to find a way to like get speed. Cause after I've had conversations with different coaches asking like, hey, like what are you guys coming in running at? Like we are not the fastest, but we are getting there. So it's kind of been really cool to kind of see that. How are we increasing speed? How are we making it game specific? Because if you look at like hitters, like you got slappers that might need a crossover. We've got other people. So really just trying to find ways of using my background in track where like I'm very Charlie Francis focused. Like we're gonna think about creating a lot of force, but sometimes that doesn't matter when you're trying to steal first to second and you got to read off of a pitcher. So doing a lot of stuff here. Actually, I think we've talked before. We started recording talking about throwing mechanics, and we're really diving down a lot of shoulder health here at Pitt of like how do we try to keep availability the highest we can for our pitchers and everyone, honestly. But really looking at the pitchers of how do we make sure our girls are available if they need to play Friday, Saturday, or if they need to get mid thrown in on a Saturday and they played Friday. So it's kind of where I'm at right now.
And then my name is Lilly Bernardi. I am currently at the University of North Carolina, and I guess I kind of had the opposite path as AK. I actually started my first full-time role working in baseball. Found my way into that as well at my next stop at Hofstra University, and it wasn't until I got here to UNC that I started to transition in my new role into the softball world. So I kind of have the opposite story there. So this is actually going to be my first full off season with the team. I got to UNC in October of last year, so not the most consistent off-season training for my team. So I'm excited to really dive in this fall and have this group from start to finish and kind of see what that does for their development over the course of this year.
Absolutely. And as you all started to allude to, the sport of softball is rather unique. And it's one that I've really grown an interest in, especially from just watching the playoffs this last year and some of the different games that were occurring and just this unpredictable nature of the sport. You know, when I grew up watching baseball, you can hate on me all you want, but I grew up as a Yankees fan. And back then it was like, routine ground ball to shortstop was always an out versus in softball anything can happen at any time. You can have a runner beat out the play. But by the same token, I was also impressed by the workload that these girls are undergoing. I was watching the Nebraska and Tennessee matchup back in the playoffs, and the pitchers pitched almost every game. I think I forget if it was Jordy or who it was, but one of them threw 21 innings just back to back to back, 3 days. And I was just shocked by that, because in baseball, where my background was initially playing and watching, that never happens. We never watch a pitcher throw 3 games in a row or throw 21 innings across the span of 3 days. And just watching the pitch motion with the windmill, I kept watching it over and over and thinking about the forces that that's creating, in particular distraction forces at the shoulder and elbow, and the amount of eccentric load that's shifted towards the front, in particular the biceps musculature, as it's more of a sagittal plane motion that I was watching or interpreting, as opposed to more of the rotational motion from like an overhead throw. I was truly impressed by what these girls were doing, and just the motions that they were doing over and over again. And again, the forces that they were undergoing. And I wanted to dive into that a little bit more, because knowing my background and knowing some of the past podcasts, I think we were too biased into thinking that maybe we just treat softball athletes like baseball athletes. And now I feel like we couldn't be more misguided. And maybe softball needs its own array of interventions. Maybe it needs its own return to play process. Maybe it needs its own unique considerations from a sports performance standpoint, because it's so unique compared to baseball. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what makes the sport so unique from your end, and what kind of things you've seen and worked at with from a performance and return to play standpoint, as far as how you go about individualizing or providing unique ways to solve some of these different problems that the softball athletes are undergoing that way.
I liked it. It was great. I think to speak to just right off the bat, jumping in with what you said, something that hits me is that like softball and baseball aren't the same. No, they're not. They're like, it's a totally different sport, right? That's why it's not called girls baseball, right? There's like a totally different array. It's a smaller field, a bigger ball, a they have different pitching motion. The strategy is different, right? Like you're kind of all over the place with the pace of the game is faster. Sorry, softball's faster than baseball, which makes it automatically better. But that's that's part of it. And then I think it goes along a little farther for me. And now that I'm in volleyball, right? It's what I realize about other sports. Men's and women's volleyball, not the same. It's called the same. It's not. Like across the board, right? I feel that way. That's why we have a separation between men and women's sports in the first place. But by nature of the physicality of the sport, it's just vastly different. And I think in general, what we've seen in like the biology is that women do have a capacity for more volume. So you're talking about these pitchers. Yeah, they got a capacity to throw more, right? They can throw harder for longer. Like you're going to look at Carly Pickens. You're talking about a game against with Carly Pickens and Jordy Ball, right? These two pitchers who, I mean, Carly Pickens didn't throw every inning, but she threw a lot of them, right? Like there were a bunch. But then you look at like Nyjah Kennedy. Nyjah Kennedy threw every game, to my knowledge, if I'm not mistaken, up until literally the final game of the World Series. So I think that that's the first thing that comes to mind for me is just looking at the differences of biology, right? The women, we can by nature handle more volume. And I think that that's something that closes the gap for me because of the lack of, intense torque in the musculature that like, yes, men are stronger, right? Like we see that in the biology as well. So by nature, their arms are like almost getting ripped off sometimes when they're able to put that much velocity on the ball, right? Or that arm or whatever, the slotting is different. If they can throw sidearm, right? Like all these things that you look at for baseball pitchers that you don't see in softball. There are not, well, there are, and anybody else jump in on this. Like there's only really one way to pitch, right? Like you can't really like I've seen so many variations in an overhand throw that I just have not seen personally in an underhand softball pitch. So I think that's the first piece to me that really comes up as something is worth diving into, and like the importance of the eccentric strength, the importance of them having some kind of aerobic base, right? That's something I think about for pitchers specifically, if we're going to hang out on that subject, is like, are we actually training them to be able to last for these games, to recover and then pitch the next day? What does that look like? Do we have that base that's built up to allow them to recover and transition and do all of those things? That's where my brain goes initially. So I'll take over the rant on that one. Dan, I'll put my flag right there.
I couldn't agree more with AK on like the aerobic capacity piece. It was something when my new coaching staff got here that they very much wanted fit pitchers. And me being coming from baseball, hockey player, like again, you look at the sport, you're like, it's all power output. let's sprint, let's just do short things. But like the more I'm diving into it and the more I'm looking at it, like our best pitchers are the ones that like during our conditioning test, whether I thought they could have been better, could have been worse, whatever. Oh yeah, like they have that output. They can go inning after inning. They can go game after game. Like it's something we've put a way more bigger emphasis on this year. And actually, one of our conditioning tests is like not a glorified, bastardized. um, but like we've added way more aerobic capacity. Like we're gonna have a Cooper test, whether that's on a bike or whatever, because I want to know what is their out, like what is that capacity purely aerobically? Like, are we in a good zone? Are we in a bad zone? Do I even know what is good for a softball pitcher? Do we need to be at the levels of my cross country kids, or is it just slightly above average is good? Like it's really opened my eyes of the sport of like you look at it and you're like, yeah, power, speed. Like, don't get me wrong, we still are gonna hammer those qualities. We still need them. But for a lot of our games, like I think we played Virginia Tech this year and like we got done at like 1 in the morning. Like we started at 3 because of a rain delay and this and that. Like that might not think like, oh, you're sitting down, you're recovering, but like just a long stretch of a day, like you need to have a base just to be able to handle that. So that's been a big eye opener for me. That's something in the last year. If you look at any of the stuff I posted of like kind of like putting out our training, what we do, like a lot of people have commented like, why so much aerobic work? Like, because we need it, especially if we have our Friday girl who might need to go in Saturday and might need to go in Sunday. Like, she needs to be able to recover in that 6 to 10 hour window, whatever is between games, and be able to be at her absolute best.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like a big theme for me this year and going into off-season meetings or before school starts meetings with my coaches, which I didn't have the opportunity to really do last year, that was a big, big point for me. It was like the word recoverability is going to be one that I use constantly with the team, and I think one that, I was able to explain to the coaches and talk to them, like, we're not necessarily in a place where we're doing the Cooper test for our, team conditioning test, but to me, I emphasize to the coaches, I will handle conditioning tests, like, however you guys want, but the biggest thing for me is how we're training in between those and the qualities that we're training in between. So I think it's always great to have a metric and have a measure of whether it's how the individual is with their conditioning, or we do more of like a team style conditioning test. That's just the approach that our coaches like to take. But the word recoverability and that aerobic component is something that we're really going to be training in between. And then just going back to the differences between baseball and softball, when I was applying for this job and I had baseball background, I worked with my coaching staff previously to be like, okay, this is kind of a good in-season outline for our pitchers, whether it's starters who are more consistent or relievers. And this is kind of what maybe the day after or day of a game could look like in the weight room or recovery wise. And when I went back in the logs from the previous year of softball, and I just saw the same names over and over and over again for our pitchers. That is when I initially realized how different this sport was, for our athletes. So yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing that I noticed at first.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like there's a common theme of laying a physiological foundation before the season starts through aerobic work, through understanding the different qualities that the athletes are going to need to display on the softball field, and understanding how you can train them ahead of time that way. And obviously, as you've all mentioned, the magic starts in the off season and then carries into the in season that way. You lay the foundation and then bring that momentum in when the season kicks off. I'm interested to hear more about how you all have gone about structuring and laying out your off-season frameworks in the past or in this year for softball. And in addition to that, Lily, having that experience of being kind of on the baseball side and the softball side, one of the things that comes up a lot when I'm talking with athletes that are throwing, even in volleyball and some of these other overhead sports, tennis, swimming, is this concept of arm care. And I feel like arm care for me, looking at a softball pitcher, or even just a softball athlete for that matter, is going to be drastically different than how might approach arm care for a baseball athlete or another overhead athlete. So I'd love to hear y'all's concepts in relation to off-season planning, but also in relation to arm care out of season and in season as well, and how you're able to help these athletes to maintain these such high workloads for such a long time.
So I'd say for me, and granted, I have a singular team that I am going off of. I don't have multiple years of softball experience. I have the only team that I've worked with thus far and the personnel that I had last year. So for me, arm care is, I mean, I'm involved in that. Our athletic trainer is involved in that. Their daily prehabs are involved in that. So I know just through conversations with our staff that that is happening somewhere on a daily basis, whether it's just the warm up exercises they're doing before hitting or their everydays and all of that. For me personally, with my personnel, I actually tended to have more shoulder stuff pop up with my fielders than I did with my pitchers. That's last year specifically. I can't say that is the same this upcoming year, but that was something that was different for me. And our outfielders, our infielders, they're throwing more overhand than our pitchers. So that was something that was kind of unique for me to experience because I didn't know what I expected coming in. So that was something that I was like, I can't just emphasize it for my pitchers. It needs to be in our program every day, whether it's, I do a lot of different variations of external rotations and posterior shoulder work, but also like mobility and some like loaded mobility. I have kind of gone down the wavelength of, if anyone's familiar with like kilo strength and kind of some of what they do, they're big on just doing a lot of pre-work. So prior to pressing, we're doing some loaded shoulder mobility, whether it's a fly, whether it's a dumbbell pullover. Um, I started using it honestly with one of my gymnastics teams because I found with like a squat, we had a lot of knee tendonitis. So doing like more knee extension prior to squatting and just getting more blood flow to those joints, I found to be helpful. And I was hoping it would have the same kind of translation when it came to maybe opening up the shoulder a little bit prior to doing any of our pressing or pulling. So that's something that I have started to do a little bit with my teams.
This is actually right in the rabbit hole of why I was slightly late before we started this of talking about arm care. So we were kind of the opposite where we've had a little bit more pitchers in the last year, and a lot of that has stemmed from this probably be a rabbit hole I'm going to come down, and maybe AK can talk about this more being in it longer with softball, but like girls are playing so much softball before they even get to us, whether that is a club team, that is a tournament team, that is your high school. I think like forget what meeting I was in, but it was like some of these girls are playing like 7, 8 games in a weekend, and you might be the best pitcher on that team. You might be going for most of those. So for our off season, um, is going to be more thorough in our first week of a pre-screen. So using our force plates, using our force frame, getting a better understanding of like, do we have a large asymmetry? Do we lack strength? Where do we need to go? Because I can come up with the best plan or give you the best exercise I think that are going to help you prevent this. But if I don't know where we're starting from, I don't know where we need to go. Do we need to lengthen tissue? Are you kind of more tight on your one side, looser on the other, the way we throw? Are you weaker internally versus externally? Like where do we need to start with it? And then is my programming throughout the fall, like I'm heavy contractual base where like I run an omni contraction. So I think in terms of making sure we're hitting it through an eccentric, an isometric, doing our concentric work, like we take that all through fall. And I've been diving more into like, do I need to keep more eccentric work in season with my teams? And the mindset's always been like, oh, they're going to be more sore, they're going to have more DOMs, but like Ake was talking about like the forces, or maybe it was you, Dan, I forget, of like just the eccentric on the bicep during the throw. Like if I'm taking that out, then the only stimulus they're getting is through throwing. Am I not helping them keep that strong by adding it in? So for me, it's morely like on our screen, all right, based on what we're seeing on our screen, and obviously our athletic trainer and myself, whether that's kids coming in for rehab, before lift, getting some treatment work done with her, we kind of individualize that on a needs as we go. And from last season, it's been very much like, all right, so-and-so has this issue, we're doing this, so-and-so in here. But I think in terms of just getting them strong, softball seems to be a team that is not a team, a sport that is highly skilled in playing, but in terms of their physical development is really where at least I'm seeing on my end. If anyone else can chime into what they've seen, it's not the case. They're not spending the time in the weight room getting stronger as they are just playing these multiple games, these multiple teams, this tournament softball where it's just constantly throwing. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at with like the rehab. We're definitely trying to be better of like a system of like, all right, this is what I've got in the weight room today. It's maybe just specific to our shoulder health. How is our athletic trainer going to build off of that? How are we maybe changing J bands or some plyo balls before practice to one that we're not overdoing it? I don't need them to do a million internal external rotations between 3 different people. And then it becomes mindless for them and they're not getting anything out of it. Or does that volume just build over time holistically and we're actually doing more harm than good for what we could be with them?
I agree, and also I have like a very different mindset when it comes to this stuff. So I threw the javelin in college. So arm care was something that I was incredibly familiar with, just in the guys in training, like just underneath the guys in training, not specific. Like I never over the course of my time at Oklahoma, never did I ever do an external rotation ever. Like it was just not a thing. We threw underweight, overweight. We worked very specific amounts of, um, we had literally, it was just called a jab lift. Like it was a javelin specific lift. It mirrored some of the pieces of our throw broken down, right? Some of them were throwing motions. Some of them were like, it sounds weird, but we would do like bilateral throwing motions. We would throw with our non-dominant side. We did so many different types of variation that at the time I just was like, this is part of the thing. I'm going to do it. But looking back with the lens that I have now, it was all arm care. It was all arm care, right? It was just not labeled as such because had you told me that I didn't go to the training room unless something was falling off or I was dying, I wasn't in there. I didn't want to. It took up time, right? I could be going to eating or I had to go to tutoring or I had to do right. It's a waste, right? In my mind. I wish it, whatever. Would probably wish I would have done it, but different conversation. Um, but what I value the most about arm care in general is just getting everything capable of handling load, right? Like, and to me, that starts at the trunk, right? That starts with your core, your trunk, whatever you want to call it. It literally has nothing to do with my arms, right? So I want to start in the middle and work my way out, right? Proximal to distal when it comes to proximal mobility, whatever it is for distal. Like, wait, what did I just say? Anyway, take that back. Anyway, mobility, stability, right? Like I want to be as stable as I possibly can be. And then I want to work out proximally and get mobile, right? I'm sorry, distally and get mobile. So in from what I do with a lot of volleyball now is very similar from what I did with javelin, with softball, with other tennis, right? With a lot of my teams that I do now, overhead and rotation is still overhead rotation, whether you're throwing, serving, whatever, right? Hitting a ball. And so I think that I took out a lot of the external rotations and a lot of that because let's be very real with the forces that you're experiencing when you throw are so high, right? Like so high that me going and doing a few external rotations with J bands before I throw has actually done zero for me when it comes to the torque that I'm about to experience when I actually throw a ball and not even throwing it hard. So while I think that the routines and like everything that we do has value because it's part of the prep, right? Sometimes it's just mental and it's the flow that these athletes get into. Um, I'm looking much more at like overspeed stuff, perturbations, right? Like some very purposeful work that is causing either co-contraction or like what am I actually looking to do at the joint that we're worried about at whatever it is at the time. And working out, right? Making sure that I mean I've had softball players in the past which is absolutely wrecked wrist mobility, right? Their forearms are weak or they're exactly the opposite from you. It sounded like Devin when I had dogs in the weight room. Like if they could have been in the weight room every single day while I was at University of Arizona, they'd have been in the weight room with me every day. They were freaking dogs. They loved training. They loved speed work. They loved the things. Well, most of them. I'm not gonna speak for all of them, but a majority of them were really bought into what we were doing. So we had, like, I'll give you an example, right? We had an off day. every Monday, right? Because the way we travel, everything's trash. There wasn't one person I didn't see on Monday because they would all come in and want to lift on Monday when we got back. And that was just, it speaks to the culture, right? I'm not trying to take credit for any of that. That's not, we're nowhere near that. But those, they saw, right, the transfer. And nobody had the same lift, right? Some of the big girls, some of my big, we'll call them like my force dominant kids. That's what I call them. They're not my big kids. They're my force dominant kids. They lifted differently than my slappers, right? Who lifted differently than my pitchers, who may have lifted differently than my outies, right? Never know. Sometimes they're all across the board and all different. But at the end of the day, when we come back to the arm care, to me, again, for pitchers especially, a lot of it starts at their low body, right? If their legs are weak or their hips are immobile or they're, whatever, you see issues from the ground up and it translates, right? It can translate into massive amounts of shoulder pain for them or, whatever kind of an issue that we're seeing with the arms. So to suffice that, let's just like pull that all back together and that like, I don't really love just specified arm care, but I do love throwing it into training in different ways, whether that just means loading and loading differently and getting just freaking strong. And then same deal, right? Strength at length, call it. That's somebody's Jordan Burning Rivers. That's somebody's like whole tagline, right? Is making sure that we're experiencing full range of the motion, that we're pretty comfortable in them, making sure we're not experiencing pain or impingement, and then working it out from there and seeing what we're capable of. Um, Going back all the way, way back, I used the on-base U assessments. So TPI did a version essentially of the same exact assessment, but for softball and baseball specifically. And Coach Candrea is a gem and put me through all of those things, the softball, the baseball. I mean, the man put me through everything because he wanted me to understand it all. And it is time consuming and sometimes terrible, but it'll show you what you need to see just through the lens of softball, baseball specific work. So I'm gonna end it right there because I can keep going on that one.
I feel like AK, what I love that you brought up, and this is kind of like somewhere that eventually I thought the conversation would come to, is how it's all related, right? Like you were talking about trunk stability, allowing for the distal mobility, and right, like I didn't have a ton of pitchers last year that had shoulder things, but man, we had low back stuff. Like that is what I experienced. So a really big theme for me this year is postural control, core engagement, even when we're tired. Like incorporating that into some of my aerobic work. We're going to be doing sleds, we're going to be doing our shuttles, we're going to be doing our tempos, but we're going to be doing med ball circuits, core circuits in between because they need to maintain that when they're tired. And that's just from some specific injuries that we see with our team or things that pop up within our team, but it's just like all related. So I love that you brought that up because that's kind of like something just saw the other end of it.
It's interesting too. I'd love to hear more about y'all's assessment process for softball athletes because obviously some of it is very visual in nature, observation in nature, versus it sounds like some of it is also very scientifically tech driven. And I think this is something that we need more of. We need more of a science and more of an understanding as to what normal versus abnormal looks like for the sport, right? What level of asymmetry between their throwing arm and non-throwing arm is acceptable, if any is acceptable. And these are questions that we're only going to answer once we start to assess the numbers and once we continue to dive in over time. What kind of assessment frameworks have really worked for you? And what kind of ideas do you have for kind of the evolution of assessment frameworks for the future of softball?
All right, I guess I'll lead this off since I already talked about some assessment stuff. I still believe heavily in a coach's eye, though. Like as much as we're doing stuff and as much as the force plates are telling me something, yeah, that's great. But like I can see if you might jump fine and it's a 2% asymmetry, but I watch you squat and now you got this major hip shift. Is that because the bar's on your back? Is it because we're now squatting post a day of practice and you're tight and all that? But for our assessment, I've evolved it from basic just jumps on the force plate, ash test, force frame to this year. We're basically taking our first full week of training is going to be our assessment. So athletic trainers have the back end of Friday for some more like passive range of motion stuff. And then I have the first 2 days. So we're going force plate jumps, ash, force frame for everyone. In the past, we've only ashed our pitchers, and just getting initial numbers on everyone, whether that is going to be useful, not useful. I want to have a baseline of as healthy as you're going to be when you come in, especially for our freshmen this year. This is the freshest I'm going to see them. They haven't played in a while. Like, let's get some initial numbers on you to kind of see where we at between force output and our asymmetries. Next, we're going to go to our force frame. Again, just looking at something a little bit different through the VALD. And then we have, I think, our hip range of motion, which is going to be through our athletic trainer. Our day 2, which is 2 of our newer tests that I'm bringing in. And one of them I did in the end of the fall is going to be our iso belt, which I think, Dan, me and you have had a lot of conversations about and looking at lower body strength. And this has really been eye-opening to me when we did it at the end of last year. And one of our pitchers who was a average squatter, I don't know, wasn't you watch her squat and I wasn't throwing fist pumps and so excited because she had 405 on the bar crushing it, but wasn't my weakest girl ever, pulls almost 8,000 newtons on the iso belt. So there's definitely a correlation between what she could squat on the bar versus what her output was. And then we can go down a whole nother rabbit hole of like time to peak force, looking at different times of the milliseconds to kind of see like, all right, is she super strong, but she's really slow? Well, she's a pitcher. She needs to be able to produce force quickly. And then also adding that for upper body, doing our iso push-up, sorry. So like kind of the bar on their back, kind of in a 90-degree pushing, looking at kind of, again, our upper body strength, because off of just that squat, I've kind of gone down this whole rabbit hole of like, I've always done 1 rep max. This is kind of how I've been. Places I've been, we didn't have tech, we didn't have a lot of things. So I was just very old school of like, we're doing rep maxes, we're doing 1 rep maxes, and that's what we're going to see from September. Did you increase 5, 10, 15, 30 pounds, whatever it is as we go through? But now with being at Pitt, are there better tests that we can be looking at to look at strength, to look at power, but then also have those other numbers as we go through? We're also going to NORBoard everyone. We had a little bit of knee issues from some transfers and all that. So again, getting everyone in, it's only going to take me a day. It's not losing a whole bunch of training, but at least I have information. Is there something that we need to address through a hamstring issue that then might affect knees down the line, might potentially, because we do sprint and we sprint a lot. Could it affect now someone getting a pulled hamstring called mid-October? And then grip, we do a 3-position grip, overhead, 90, and down below, looking at that. So those are kind of like our, we'll call them strength and conditioning tests, and then athletic trainer takes them through FMS and doing some other passive range of motion stuff with them. And it's kind of evolved from last year to the years prior to this one of adding these other ones of really being able to just get a better idea of where are athletes at, where are they deficient, how can I, as AK was saying, individualize their training. Like, I've been fortunate where when I got here, low hanging fruit was high, so we could kind of all run the same program and we got faster, we got stronger. Availability was high. Last year, we had some new people come in, some transfers where they needed some more individualization. But this year, not just myself, but my coaching staff on how they're bucketing KPIs they want to see on the field, whether that's we need 15 home runs out of you, we need 20 stolen bases, or bases. Wow, words are hard for me. How do I make sure I'm providing a quality training session for them to make sure they are able to achieve what coaches need them to? If we got a girl who's looking at doing 20 stolen bases and all I care about is her force output and she is the slowest one on the team, that's not going to be good for what she needs to do. But that's kind of how I'm looking at our assessment and our testing. And then through the 1080 stuff, really, I'm just using it to look at a little bit of individualization for our sprinters. A lot of return to play has been on that. So we've had a girl with an ACL last year. So it was using that to just kind of see over time, all right, what does that stride look like? What does the right to left frequency look like? That is way more on a return to play basis because we only have one. So it's hard to get 25 sophomore girls through it. I tried it one day for a training session and it was a terrible fail.
I agree in a lot of ways with that, especially the last statement. That resonates with me because I used to do the whole like first week, like let's go, like let's get all these assessments in, let's do all this shit. I don't do it anymore with any of my teams. I am one of those like let's assess as I go, and I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. I think everybody has their structure and what works best for them, especially when it comes to like pulling in your athletic trainers, pulling your new PTs. Like if everybody can kind of do that, and I defer a lot of that stuff out. I'm like, hey, for athletic training, can we do this shoulder test and this test for the hips and this like for volleyball? Can we do this one for the ankles? Can we do like whatever? And I think that for me historically has worked better because I also, shockingly enough, haven't had access to a ton of technology for the first, I don't know, 4 years of my career. I had very little access. We did not have force plates in Arizona. We didn't have any when I was there. They have them now, of course, because why not? But um, there are things I just didn't have. So it was like, okay, what are we looking at, right? Do I go ahead and get a force velocity profile on some of these athletes in certain, with certain movements and certain ranges of motion? And that's kind of where I landed. And so that's something for me that I really value. I'll do a force velocity profile on everybody because I can do it and it can be my original right off the bat training session. It's very low technicality, right? Like it's not technical. Nobody's going to get hurt doing it unless we just don't listen, which I'm not saying it can't happen, but I don't want it to, right? But there are those things that I think for me, it's just condensed it a little bit and made things simpler for me to do over the course of the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks if I need to, because I am very selfish with the time that I get. And I'm very intentional about, hey, how am I programming this in over the week to make it make sense for what we're doing right now? On top of any transition and return to play bullshit that we have to follow, right? 50, 30, 20, 10, right? Whatever you want to sit there and tell me lies. I don't that if we all did that, and let's just be real, you can delete this part out if you want. If we actually did that, we would legitimately waste so much time, we would never get anything done. If we transitioned them like that after every time that they had like something crazy happen and we cut volumes so severely, going back to what Devin said about the coaching guy, right? At the end of the day, like I'm going to go in best practice with everything that I know to do at volumes and intensities that make sense, right? Um, but to keep my certification, I always adhere to those return to play guidelines after they've had a break of 2 or more weeks, always. Um, but throwing those things in over time for me has been so helpful. And so right off the bat, we're learning what I want you to do and then sprinkling in assessments within the week, the 2 weeks, right? Whatever it is. And I do that at 3 points during the season. Now, with softball, I would do it actually at 4 points during the season, right? Beginning and end of our off season and, beginning and end of our in season. And that told me a lot about where we needed to be and what the summer could look like. And I don't believe in a throwing shutdown. We would do an overhand throw and an underhand for some of the pitchers, right? Whatever. We would do an overhand throw to see like velocities. And there were at the time, they would tell them, hey, don't throw for however many weeks, however many months, right? Whatever that looked like. And I think you set yourself up for failure there. And you set yourself up to really incur some injury coming back, right? So are we seeing decreases in volume? Yes. Are we seeing decreases in intensity? Sure. But like, let's keep throwing and let's keep looking at that, right? And that to me is where, to circle that all back, the assessment value is in the return to play. If I have a kid go out, get injured, get sick, whatever, a kid go out one time for like 3 weeks with a concussion, like gone, and was not anywhere near the weight room, the softball, nowhere for 3 weeks, then kind of came back and then wasn't back and then was back like a month later. And so you're like, good God, where do we even start, right? Again, the value in the baseline assessment took her all the way back and literally started at 40% of everything. I was like, I can't, like, looks like we'll be walking for a while and like, whatever else. So I think that's the value in it for me, but I hate assessments and I hate spending time doing it. I would rather get into the nitty gritty and start solidifying our movement patterns and getting them to understand my process and, um, the things that we need to accomplish very quickly. And that's true with volleyball now because we only get them for a very short amount of time before we actually start playing. But softball, look at you. You have the fall. I'm so happy for all of you.
I will say, okay, before Leah hops in, I'm so glad I'm not the only one that feels that, because doing my annual plan of like, all right, this week is assessment, and then trying to be like, well, I'm losing this week and I'm losing that. That's another week we could be doing 3 days of hinging to make sure I'm glad I'm not the only one who also doesn't like, is this the best thing I should be doing?
Yeah, I very much used to be that way too. Like week 1 is testing week. Now currently, like our team, it's week 1 for us when school starts isn't necessarily like a training week for the team because physicals are still rolling in and the timeline with that. So it is we get 1 day pretty much, or I asked for 1 day to come to the weight room to get all the things that myself and our athletic trainer wanted to test them in. But It's a mixture. In their physicals, we were able to incorporate some of the internal and external rotation, like a horizontal abduction with the dynamo, is something that was new this year that we wanted to bring in. Our athletic trainer does a like scap movement test. Once again, it's just like an eyeball analysis. It's a video. We kind of sit back and watch it back for each of our athletes. In here, when they come in, we'll do counter movement jumps on the force decks, but that's part of our training. And every time they step into the weight room, we're doing that. So just to start collecting on them, we'll do that. We get a squat video. We'll do a bodyweight squat from the side and from the back first, and then we'll go empty barbell, but adding the bar to see how that changes as soon as we add a bar to it. And just kind of talk through, okay, when we start lift next week, these might be people who we're keeping an eye on. Do we need to insert a heel lift or footwear, whatever? Some chin-ups or a inverted row variation for those who don't do chin-ups, just a measure of progress that we'll retest towards the end of the semester. We do some push-up testing with them, neutral grip. Honestly, once again, just kind of like writing notes as I'm watching them actually doing the push-ups, like where are their arms? What does that form look like? And some like T-spine rotation stuff is going to be new this year with athletic training. So that's kind of like our first day. But granted, I only get really one day or asked for one day to work with them this week. And then week 2, it's just training. All of our strength metrics, I used to be let's test. But honestly, I just want my athletes to better understand progressive overload. So I kind of want them to understand every time we are on week 3 of a program, I maybe only want you to have like 1 or 2 reps left in the tank in the off season. Like there's a time and place where that's going to be different, but in the off season, I want them to understand week 1, I want you to leave a little bit of room and I want to progress over the next 2 weeks, but by that week 3, like know that what you're doing that week, I'm going to go in, I'm going to take an estimated 1 RM for you, and I'm just constantly updating that throughout the semester. That's kind of my new approach that I started taking in the spring for some of my teams in the off season, and one that I liked. So I plan to continue with that.
That's my favorite because I think everybody comes to that at some point. Like, I love hearing it because it's that thing to me that like happened, I don't know, a year, maybe 2 years ago, where I was like, why would I care if they squat 300 pounds? Like, and then they look like shit and their back hurts for 10 days. Like, who cares? Like, I've been over the 1 RM thing since before my time at Arizona, but I'm on that same exact track. I don't think I realized how much and how against it I was until this last year. And in the best ways, though. And I'm not saying being strong is bad. Like, no, I don't think anybody's, you know, any worse off for being stronger, but where, why, and how, right? And then at what cost? We sacrificing speed, like Devin alluded to earlier. Like, yay, she got so much stronger, but holy shit, she's slow. Like, I'm getting fired, right? And if I got a leadoff hitter that can't make it to first in what 1.4, 1.5, there is a minute amount of time that she's got to get from point A to point B. And if that slapper is not there in under 2 seconds, like she's out every time. And that's, so this like trade-off. Like, yeah, no, my slappers can't squat 135. No, like they can't even squat their body weight. But they can freaking get from point A to point B and then just work that back, right? What else do I have to work on? And how else do I go about keeping them healthy and keeping them available? Because if they're not available, who gives a shit, right? But I piss off their low backs. Now they can't swing. They're out of hitting for the week. Now what, right? Now I'm in trouble. So I love that you alluded to that and like, or brought it up and in general said it point blank, because I think that strength testing, I don't care. Well, I do to get the assessment, right? I kind of care where we start. And that may be how many times can you pick up 60 pounds? How many times can you pick up the bar, right? Whatever that looks like. And then when we do that test again, have you either increased your capacity? Can you do more of that same weight? Or can you do more weight for the same or whatever amount of reps? And I think that's the beauty, and like it can go all over the place. It's not just, getting stronger all the time. I'm not here to make you a professional weightlifter. Like, I'm here to make sure that you are healthy and available so that in every realm and every facet of your performance, that it translates because you're healthy. And then we can kind of push from there and understand that that healthy athlete is now capable of doing so much more in that sport. Whereas if I'm just obsessed with their squat numbers, like I'm going to put them in a hole all the time.
Yeah. Like I definitely want to, like, we want to see improvement because I think not many of us are like here where we don't need to improve. Like I want to see improvement, but I've also reshaped my, like, the way I think about it to not just be like it's this year. It's also, I mean, obviously transfer portal very much a thing. But for those who are coming back, is our starting point a little bit higher the next year than it was the year before? Like, that's what I'm looking for because then we can build off of that. That's what the 4-year progression is if I'm lucky enough to get you for that long. Um, so yeah, it's definitely been helpful to kind of change the way I've thought about it.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more though. It really is like in all facets. And I mean, even going back to the aerobic capacity thing, that like it like twinged me when it was like, is there a standard, right? Is there a standard for aerobic capacity with pitchers? No, because you could have some of the best pitchers in the world whose conditioning is ass, right? Like some of the best pitchers that come in, recruited, highly touted, highly recruited to come in and they're, the standard, whatever, however you're measuring your standard, say you can go to max, right? Your standard is a 45. This girl comes in and she's got a freaking 29. And you're like, oh, you suck. Obviously, you need more conditioning to get to this standard number. And then at what cost? Right. So instead of having a standard, can we just look at improving her from where she is now? Right. Using that assessment and just pulling in, which is why I have such a deep hatred in my heart for team standards in certain categories. I get it. I understand. I get the motivation for them coming back fit or ready or whatever it is to have a goal to meet, but to me, sometimes the most important thing is that, look, we saw progress, right? From the time she started here to the time we finished our training here, she improved yay much. And then coming back into the next year, right? She started here and now we're here. Like, how exciting. So I'm going to get off that soapbox because I can go on that one for a minute.
I love when you go unhinged, AK. I freaking love it. That's the energy we need. One of the things you brought up in relation to return to play that I really want to bring back for a second is in the sport of softball, to the best of my knowledge, there's not really great protocol driven approaches for any type of injury returning to softball. A lot of times, individuals are told, oh, just follow the plan that they would use for baseball, right? Follow the baseball plan. Well, this is researched and established. And as we've outlined today, there's drastic differences between baseball and softball, where I think in the future, work needs to be done to develop more return to play kind of frameworks, if you will, for some of these different softball cases, softball injuries, and so on that way. But one of the things I think that you all have done such a phenomenal job of is outlining some of the principles that would essentially compose one of these return to play frameworks, right? One of the things that's continued to come up over and over again is aerobic capacity. And one of the things that's driven me crazy about working with athletes is how many of them in their rehabs completely miss the aerobic boat. And as a result, we get athletes that are able to pass all of these return to play tests, whether that be hops or strength outputs or whatever that way. However, they're so fatigued and gassed in minutes that it really doesn't matter. None of it matters because they're not conditioned enough to return to their sport. So I think in relation to return to play for softball, having aerobics become a part of that, aerobic conditioning that is, become a part of that process, in addition to having that end in mind, whether that's assessment information that you got from them previously or assessment information that you're able to kind of collectively pull from your testing that you did with your athletes as a whole, as a team that way, having some kind of end in mind approach. And I think on top of that, you all have brought up a number of times about the multidisciplinary approach that you all have at your universities, how ATs are collaborating with you and so on that way. And I can't tell you how instrumental I believe that is to the success of an athlete returning to their desired level of performance following an injury. Because when you're at the Division I level, or really any level, in my opinion, your goal should not just be to get them back to their sport, but to their desired level of performance, or even beyond where they were previously, since you've got this time to kind of step back and reset that way. in addition to having a team-based approach, ensuring all the boxes are checked from a conditioning standpoint into the local tissue, the global tissue, and beyond, do you have any other type of principles or key things that you would want to integrate within some type of return to play framework for a sport like softball? I know this is a little more theoretical too, so.
No, because there's not time. I don't get that kind of time. I'm just real. And I know I'm not right in the middle of the softball world currently, but I know for beyond a shadow of a doubt, in the past when I have had athletes who are injured, or like one, I'll give you an example, years and years ago, broke her thumb, right? And had to have surgery to reset her thumb and do all these things. Well, the second that she could get back, even into like getting her blood pressure higher, like there was all these rules, right? It was softball. And like, well, we're going into season. She's incredibly valuable and important. She is going to go to softball. So while I would love to be like, no, 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 we have to progress her from yay to yay to yay, they're going to tell me to kick rocks and mind my own business because she is more valuable on the field than her capacity is in numbers, right? In number form. So while I do wish that that was something that we could play into just a little bit more, the time constraints don't feed into that. It's not pro ball, right? It's not, there is not a, there is a finite amount of time. She has a burner clock on her, right? She's a senior and she's going to be done in 6 months and she needs to play. And so there are situations like that where I'm like, cool, I could have all that information and I could make sure her fatigue index, that window has closed on the fatigue index, making sure that she's ready, like in every facet. I can make sure the throws counts go back up, right? Whatever it is that we're looking at and considering for that athlete's return to play. But in my world, even now, like honestly, even now and in volleyball, same deal. It's going to be their time to get back on the floor or field, whatever, is so serious that it's like less is more. What can I assess that's going to make sure that athlete is not in the immediate risk of getting hurt again? And how do we go from that? And usually that's in our test. That's the mid thigh pull. That's our, maybe it might be in our squat jump. It might be in our counter movement, non counter movement, whatever it is that we're doing to assess. Looking at those numbers is the easiest way for me personally to be able to say, okay, hey, they're within this range. I feel okay letting us go back to do these things. And then again, going back to the coaching eye thing, if something looks wrong, it is. They're like, no, I'm fine. No, you're not. You can't even walk right. Like, get lost. We're cutting down on time. And if you're able to spend that much time at practice, games, whatever, to look at them, to eyeball them and go, hey, something's not right there. Somebody's not moving correctly. And then we can call it back. For me personally, that's better than for me to throw numbers up because the numbers sometimes make me a liar. I can literally look at these numbers and say, hey, nope, she's not ready to go. And then she goes back and practices and blows everybody out of the water. And they're like, you're a dumbass. I am. So past experience.
I'm gonna say, like, just again, my mind was spinning as AK was talking and just thinking of things we've had here and all that. But like, I feel like everyone wants to have this systematic approach of like return to play, right? And like it fits in these guidelines and it fits in these weeks. And don't get me wrong, there needs to be a plan. We just can't throw shit on the wall and hopefully it works. But every athlete's going to be different. You're going to have some athletes who like, I want to play. I need to get there now. And maybe it's just for the mental state of them, of getting them more on the field, even though technically, well, yeah, you're not fit enough to play yet. Let them play. Let them kind of fall within the guidelines. I mean, obviously, if we're coming right out of surgery, yeah, you're not going to go throw. But like if we're a couple weeks in and they're in a straight leg cast, if they tore their ACL, if they can sit on a bucket and just underhand, like let's get them involved more. I think with our return to play, like we have to think of not only just like the physiological of like the healing, everything going on, but also like what athlete are we working with? What is their mental capacity? Like, do they live and die softball? Like I know me, like growing up, I played hockey my whole life. I remember in juniors tweaked my meniscus. I think the only thing I wanted to do was go back to play. I would have took 7 or 8 Advils, whatever I needed to do to get to play, to get back in there. And this is probably a random, someone's gonna be like, this guy's an idiot. But anyways, looking at like the return to play, like having guidelines to fall under, but I think we need to look at more individualizing it for the athlete for what is best for them on a multitude, whether that is physical, psychological, being part of the team, like there's nothing worse than being an athlete and you get injured, your surgery, and next thing you know, it might be 5 weeks and you've really been around the team. Like that's your family, those are your girls. Like, but you're separated because, well, we have to see the athletic trainer and then you got to go see the PT and you're just kind of siloed throughout it. So I think just finding ways of making it more individualized in terms of how do we give them the best situation to obviously return the quickest they can, depending on the situation. I mean, obviously, if it's a major surgery, yeah, you're probably not going to play this year. If it happens January 8th in like your second preseason practice, like yeah, you're probably done. But how do we kind of really make it more about them versus just this? This is XY school's university's protocol for whatever injury, and these are the steps we take, and these are the amount of times it takes. These are the KPIs we need to hit. Like, I love the idea of like ranges. Are you in ranges? She might not be 50%, but she's 45. Is that really going to make a difference? She's not at 100%, but she's going out and she's crushing balls. Like, yeah, she hasn't hit in a couple weeks. She wants to get out there and show she can still do it. I think I don't know. That's my rant and ramble, and I'm sure it was more nonsense than not, but that's just kind of my thought process.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think you can follow the same exact protocol, have the same exact injury, and just two different people and have it go two different ways. Like, I think it does come back to the individual. It comes back to the personnel. I love that you mentioned the mental aspect of it too. Um, but I think with that, it's just like, who are we dealing with? Is it someone who you're gonna tell them you can do this, and then they are going to also disregard any of the specific restraints that they were put under, and then, like, they end up putting themselves in a worse situation. Like, I think you need to have strict guidelines sometimes if you know you are dealing with someone specifically who needs to explicitly be told, "Yes, this, no, that." So, I think sometimes you need that, and then I think it's also a very real conversation of, like, we're gonna do everything we can to get you to play softball or play your sport, but you also have to understand that these are the hours you spend training during the day, and there are X more amount of hours where you need to do the proper things nutritionally, recovery-wise, sleep-wise. Like, there are so many other things. So I will do my part to give you what you want, and that's to play softball. But you also kind of have to be an adult and be able to take ownership in what you're doing outside of that to make sure that you're recovering well. Because yeah, you're in a return to play process, but you're also like you're still recovering from an injury.
Yeah, and that's one of the many reasons I very passionately hate the word protocol, because it seems that if you follow this map, you just magically end up at the destination you're after. And that's why I try to intentionally use terms like principles and framework, because everyone is different. And in reality, I don't think any one protocol agrees with any one other protocol unless there was some copywriting going on. So I think at the end of the day, as long as you understand the underlying principles and how to provide them for your athletes, then you're on the right path. And as you alluded to there just a minute ago, it comes back to knowing the athletes that you work with. And a lot of the times people look at some of these different sports that I've done roundtables on, like field hockey, like lacrosse, like softball, and they say, well, it's not football, it's not basketball, it's not baseball. It's not one of the sports that I want to work with. So as a result, they don't invest the same amount of time and energy into it. And it breaks my heart every time I see it, because at the end of the day, as long as you take the time to know your athletes, put in the time, the effort, and the energy, it doesn't have to be a 100% perfect return to play process. It doesn't have to be the number one exercise for this condition and that condition and so on that way. If you humanize the entire element, show them that you care, and check all of the major boxes in relation to the principles that need to be achieved, then odds are you're going to be successful. But a lot of the times, I think we get so caught up in the minutia of developing a specific protocol for every single thing. And until we have it, we just kind of sit there with our hands in our pockets, wondering what we are supposed to do. When in reality, as you all have outlined, the more actively we can get involved in this, the more the more compassionate we can be and the more we can humanize the entire process, the better the overall outcome is going to be in relation to return to play, regardless of what the injury is in softball, or regardless of if the sport is even softball. It could be something completely different. But until we get to that concept, until we get to that mutual understanding in the space, I think we're going to continue to see these return to play issues coming up over and over and over again. And we end up in arguments over arbitrary numbers that probably don't mean nearly as much as we think they do, because we haven't come to agree upon these big rock principles that outline the entire glass jar. And instead, we're too busy arguing over grains of sand in the jar that should come much later on.
Dan, you can maybe call me out on this if I'm completely wrong, but I mean, I think of like return to play like anything else. It's training. Like you're gonna scale it one way, you're gonna scale it another way, right? I had a ACL girl like late stage return to play with me. Not saying I made stuff up, but like we did quality training. We did a little bit more today, a little bit more yesterday. This didn't feel good. All right, we scaled it back. All right, 3 sprints. The fourth one, your knee started to hurt. All right, let's scale it down. 15 yards felt good. And we just kind of had this intelligent way of training where it's just like, let's just ebb and flow with it. Let's kind of make sure like we're progressing week from week and we're kind of trying to push that needle moving forward. But I think sometimes with RTP, it's like we want to be so specific with it. Like it's training. Just find where the baseline is and then progressively move it weekly, monthly, however you want to look at it. And again, if I'm completely wrong, please let me know. I'll learn something on this.
I don't think you're wrong at all, dude. I think that's listening to you, Dan, and kind of what you were actually asking. I think I was at a misunderstanding of the original question. So we really like in my brain, if this is a framework, I think there's only two things that actually have to happen is that you have to rebuild confidence and try to eliminate compensation. I think those are the two things. Like if I'm looking at a framework for how I'm going to return this athlete to play, like I said, the numbers can matter. Like I said, I've got personally, I have scales that I look at where it's like, hey, are they in this range? If they are, cool. I feel confident in returning them to some extent. But the overall goal I personally have when we're returning to play is to rebuild your confidence. Because how often have we seen that? Like Devin, I'm sure if you're talking about an ACO, we can speak directly to it, right? Their confidence is shot. They can't even walk unassisted for a long time. So like, how are they supposed to trust that when they go out and they get smoked in the leg, that it's not gonna, have a re-tear or something insanely horrible that could happen? And they think about that, right? Like that's just so, again, going way, way back. Again, Devin talked about the mental. It's all it is. So when we're rebuilding physically and we're rebuilding tissue tolerances and we're doing all of those things, am I building you up? And that's part of the issue I have with the constant testing, with the constant physical testing when they're doing or the return to plays, is because if they have a bad day and they go in and they get a crappy number on an isokinetic test or whatever it is that they're doing, it ruins the rest of their day, maybe the rest of their week, because they feel like they're going backwards, right? Or they're backsliding or whatever, when at the end of it may have just been one shitty day. So I think those are my two things is confidence and then eliminating compensatory movements, right? Making sure that we're not causing an issue somewhere else because they look fine, but they're still compensating in some other way.
I think more of my return to play was more heart to hearts than actual training. It was probably 50-50 on both ways of just, all right, we're gonna take a 2-minute break and turn into a 15-minute heart to heart of just like, no, we got this. We're gonna keep going. So again, excellent point, AK, on like the confidence part.
Yeah, and then I think also to go back to like it's training piece is like the part of it where a lot of times we can be focused on like, okay, what can we adjust in the weight room? Like what can we do today? Can we progress her here? But also like taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. Like is she doing more at practice that day? Is she doing more in the training room that day? I think it's coordinating with the other people that are involved in this process so that when she shows up sore as hell tomorrow, where did it come from? Like, we have to kind of know that and also understand like where our disciplines fall within that system because we don't all want to make this big jump at the same time. Like everyone gets excited in a staff meeting. Okay, like we got cleared to do more, but it's like we can't all take the same jump at the same time because then if something is hurting, if something is super sore the next day, like where was it from? So I think it's just the training process of adjusting a variable and seeing how they react to it. And then going back to like the testing piece, yeah, we have some of these pre-tests on them and we can go back and kind of make that comparison. But I think the frequency of how often you're doing those tests allow for them to grow a little bit. Like, it doesn't have to be a weekly thing. You can have a bad week. You could be tired because you tried something new. You could just be tired from the weekend or you had a bad class. But like, give them a few weeks to retest certain things so that it's a confidence builder to be able to have enough of a kind of runway in order to see improvements because that's what they want.
I feel like we could probably talk about this all day long until we're blue in the face that way. I should say Carolina blue since we have UNC represented here. But with that in mind, I feel like we covered so many amazing insights and perspectives in today's discussion. Is there anything we missed or any other thoughts or remarks that y'all wanted to bring up today?
Deepening the bullpens in general so that we don't have to do the whole like one kid throws her arm off for all season long. Whatever. The talent will come.
For people who want to find out more about y'all online that way, where can they find you at? Instagram, LinkedIn, MySpace, Napster, AIM, whatever you got.
Do you still have your MySpace? I need to know.
So I recently found out that the servers are active, so I made a new account. Just to say that I've got a MySpace. I have like 2 connections because turns out no one actually uses it anymore, but I make the joke in almost every episode and it's yet to let me down. So
It's amazing. Amazing. I'm literally only on Instagram and only sometimes. You're probably going to see more dogs and coffee than you see of anything else, but that's okay. That's the only place you're going to find me if you don't text me.
what's your handle?
Oh, my name, Ashley Kowalewski. That's it.
I'm also on Instagram. It's Lilly_Bernardi1. That might change or is gonna change probably in the next 2 months. But so if you need to find me, you can look at the staff directory on UNC if you can't find me on Instagram under that name.
Yay, Jake.
Congratulations.
If you look on Pitt, you can find my email. I think it's dyoung@athletics Pitt or Pitt Athletics. I don't know. Look it up. I don't remember what it is. But also, if you need to find me as someone who's got my number, I'm terrible at answering emails. I think I have almost 4,000 unread in my inbox. The staff is the face is what I get all the time from my staff.
Oh,
Instagram is probably where I'm most active. I think this last like summer, spring, I just kind of documented a little bit more of our training. And then this summer kind of went full transparency where I uploaded annual plans, our entire sheets, like film stuff. Like it was a way of me just trying to get more information. And a lot of people have reached out and kind of helped me become a better coach. So if you guys want to see exactly what we're doing, I share everything full transparency. You can like it, not like it. You can question me on it. I'll give you my reasons why, but hopefully gonna keep that going this fall unless something crazy happens where I also have 12 freshmen, so God knows how much I'll have my phone out or which interns I'll have where I'll want them to film stuff. So I might just be fully on just trying to get these girls up and running. But yeah, Instagram's probably where I'm most active.
no, I love that. I had every intention of doing the exact same thing over the summer. And then I lost all my interns and it was just me and 19 kids. So I was like, well, none of that's happening.
I was lucky and only 2 of the girls are from Pittsburgh that trained with me. The rest of them are out of town. So it was easy just to be like basically a one-on-one session. Be like, all right, we're just going to video this.
But someone asked me recently, like, why I haven't posted as much where I'm at, like, of my athletes. I'm like, because I can never find my phone. Like, for coaching, like, I don't know what rack I left it at. I don't know where I put it in the dumbbell racks, but like, that's why.
Yeah, and we all have I have every intention of doing it. I'm like, I'm gonna show because this phase is gonna be so cool and like got these kids that are gonna jump out the gym and then I'm like, it's August. I filmed 0 things over the summer. Like,
Yeah.
cool, cool, cool.
Oh my goodness. So that explains why I haven't seen any of y'all on TikTok yet then.
No, not what you'll never see me on TikTok.
Yeah, no.
I
It's
don't-
too
I don't
late. If you don't
understand it.
have
I
it
don't
by
get it.
now,
Yeah,
you can't get it.
I'm 32 years old. Like, keep me off of it. I don't need it.
Yeah, you brought me back when you said MySpace and Napster. That brought me right back to middle school.
I
Like,
know.
Yeah, I was in 3rd grade when I had my illicit MySpace page. So youth here. But Anyways, we'll link to all those social media handles in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch them, you can just click there and find out everything Lilly, AKN, Devin are up to. This was amazing. Thank you so much for your time and all the amazing insights you all shared.
Thank you.